Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
I don't normally name podcasts, but if I gave this one a name, it probably would be Behind the Words. And what do I mean by that? What goes into writing a book? Many of us have those aspirations of writing something. Maybe it's fiction, maybe it's a nonfiction book. We might have ideas, but then our head gets in the way and we think, well, I can't do that. There's no way I can't write a book. How do I do that? Well, you talk to this guy, Mark. I know a guy. His name is Mark. He can walk you through the entire process from the concept, the writing, character development, right down to the editing, the publishing, right down to the cover and the marketing. And we're going to talk with him today, and also somebody he's worked with. Mark Pogodzinski from NFB Publishing is back with us. How you doing today, Mark?
Good. How are you?
Real good. Who do we have with us?
We have Moxie Gardner, author of Virgin Snow.
And welcome, Moxie. How you doing?
Great. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on your podcast, Steve.
Good to have you both with us. And I'm guessing, I know Mark's in the Buffalo area. I'm guessing you are, because this story is kind of based in Buffalo. Am I right about that?
Well, you're right that it's based in Buffalo, but right now I am not in Buffalo. I'm in West Virginia.
Well, funny thing is, I was going to say, if you're in Buffalo, you probably have snow. We're talking, i.e. the title of the book, but in Virginia, you got snow too.
We do.
How funny is that? Are you originally from Buffalo?
I am. I grew up there, spent the better part of my life there. Recent transplant to this area.
Gotcha. So tell us about your book. What's it about?
Okay. Well, Virgin Snow is the story of a 13-year-old girl who grows up in Buffalo back in the late 1960s, early 70s. And she wants what all young girls of that era wanted, which was to get married and have a big family. But her dream goes out the window when her father, on his deathbed, reveals a terrible family secret. And as a good Catholic girl, she comes to believe she has to sacrifice her life in order to save his soul. During the tumultuous 1960s and 70s, there were plenty of opportunities to do that.
Wow. I have to ask, where did the concept for that come from?
Well, this is a book I've wanted to write since I was in high school. And I often thought about, what would happen if you felt like you got a mission from God and that you had to carry out, but you had no idea how to go about carrying it out. So you just sort of fumbled through life trying to do the right thing, never knowing if you were or you weren't doing the right thing. And poor Cozy McCarthy, who is the main character in my book, she makes a lot of mistakes throughout this book.
Wow. So I want to make sure I have it clear that her father was about to pass away, and that's
Yes.
where this all came to light, where he bestowed upon her what her mission should be or shall be.
Actually, he dies. Her mother, who hears the secret, curses her father to hell. And Cozy hears all this and believes that, her father is doomed. And in order to save his soul, she's going to have to do something to sacrifice her own life to save his soul.
Wow. Right there, it makes you want to read the rest. To see what happens. And she was 13 at this time?
Yes, and it takes her through most of her high school years.
What a challenging age.
That's for sure.
Yeah, you're transitioning. You're right from, a little girl to a young woman. A lot of things are happening in your world, your body, everything like that. Was that intentional, picking that age?
Absolutely. I think that those years, ages 13 to say 17, are some of the most formative years in your life. They really shape who you are as an individual. That's when you really begin to form your own identity. And, for girls, particularly at that time, there were so many things that were changing. We were still learning things from our mother about how girls were supposed to behave. But at the same time, you had the women's liberation movement telling us that we had the opportunity to do other kinds of things. And so girls caught at that time and in that age group were completely confused about life. I thought it was a very interesting time to write about.
Yes. And for a moment there, I was so focused on 13 and the story of the father, the mother, the situation there. I know you mentioned it, late 60s. I forgot about it for a moment. And then when you said it again, I was like, whoa, all right, it was an interesting time.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Interesting. Is there a piece of cozy in you?
You know, I wish there was. Cozy is the type of girl I like to say she's the daughter my mother wished she had.
Yeah.
But she's also the kind of girl that I wish I knew because I like her a lot. She's a very sincere, kind, and honest person. She has a lot of really good qualities. And I wanted to make her a very sympathetic character because try as she might to do good, to do right in the world, so many things go wrong for her. And your
Hmm.
heart kind of just goes out to her.
She seems like a very determined, tenacious young woman. Would you say that?
Absolutely, she is. And it
Hmm.
becomes more so by the end of the book,
Wow. Mark,
after she's gone through quite a few trials by fire.
well, you said she made some mistakes, don't we all? When you got this concept from Moxie, Mark, what were you thinking? Did you instantly say, "Yeah, this is a book here"? Did it need some tweaks? What were your first thoughts?
I like the concept, the idea of coming of age and having a quest at that time in your life. You mentioned the age of 13. Almost every religious denomination has some sort of ceremony
Mm.
from childhood to adulthood at that age, and I
Oh,
thought it really worked well, especially because the main character does get this quest from a higher power, and I thought that fed into it. And growing up in Buffalo, the Irish name, I know a lot of McCarthy's, McCartans, and so a lot of that spoke to me because of my upbringing and the idea of going through that at that age. Plus, I like historical fiction. I like the fact that it's set at a historical time, and it brought a lot more into it, especially at that time frame, the 60s and 70s. So there are a lot of things going for it. And again, we had talked about it before. A character needs a quest, and it needs the character needs to be driven to do something. And I thought that character had a fantastic motivation.
did you find, Mark, when you first saw the concept, that it needed to be amped up? What do I mean by that? That in her quest, in Cozy's quest, that she needed more hurdles to jump through, or more challenges. Did you feel any of that?
I thought Moxie had done a great job with it, and because of the way that book is written, it wasn't, not to say that it wasn't a fast movie, but it was epic in scale. We weren't looking to save the world or a sci-fi or fantasy concept. It was grounded. It was down to earth. It was set in an interesting historical timeline. So I thought that gave it the gravity it needed to have a really intricate plot, really interesting. And again, the main character was a driving force, in my opinion.
Hmm. When we talk about those type of fiction books where they're going to save the world,
Mm.
in a way, this is almost as big as that, because Moxie, doesn't it come down to honor thy parents?
Absolutely, it does. But not only honor thy parents, she has a sense of honor and duty, not only to her family, but to Buffalo, her city, and to the country. So she gets involved in all kinds of things. She gets involved in the civil rights movement. She gets involved in the anti-war protests. She sees how the Catholic Church is changing at this time.
Mm.
And, she tries to follow along and accommodate the changes, even though her own family is having a very difficult time with it. So, yeah, it comes down to a sense of honor and duty, in addition to her very strong moral compass, which she gets from her religion.
Why did you pick the late 60s, early 70s?
Well, first of all, there are a lot of things going on in this country right now, and that I think young people in particular are having a hard time understanding and really worrying about that maybe the country isn't going to get through this. Maybe these are really the toughest of times. Well, I wanted to illustrate a point in history that our country went through, where we went through a really, really difficult time, where things looked really bleak, especially to young people. We had riots. We had terrible things happen in the civil rights movement. There was a lot of violence, but the country muddled through. And I think that the story of resilience was an important one. And I thought that by going back in history to a time where we were experiencing different, difficult kinds of things and pulled through, it might give young people hope.
The historical portion of this, I would imagine you had to do some research. You may be aware of these events, but to get it right, you had to get it right.
Oh, definitely. And that was very, very important to me and continues to be as a writer of historical fiction. Um, I like making up stories, but what I don't want to get wrong is the actual historical events,
Yeah.
the time frame, the chronology. I want that to be absolutely accurate so that the story becomes believable. It isn't a fantasy. I have had people read this and ask me, is this autobiographical? Because it seems so real. Well, it isn't real at all. The story is completely made up. But the facts that serve as the background of the story, they are real.
I'm not a writer, but I have to tell you, Moxie, I couldn't sleep at night knowing that I didn't get it, the historical things right. Like if you're going to do it, you got to do it. It's got to be real.
Exactly.
You gotta feel that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I got to tell you, Buffalo has some great resources in terms of providing that historical documentation. Um, I don't know if you've been to Buffalo or are in Buffalo, but there is a Buffalo History Museum, which has a tremendous historical library. The Buffalo and Erie County Library System has a wonderful historical reference room. So I've made a lot of trips to those kinds of places, sat down and worked with the librarians to make sure we got everything right.
Wow. Oh, you really went over above and beyond.
But I love it. It was a
Yeah.
labor of love. To me, that's the fun part of writing historical fiction.
Did you ever think that you could write a book?
Did I ever think that?
Yeah.
I I sure hoped that almost my entire life. I wanted to do it. But of course, life gets in the way. I did other things. And it was not until this stage of my life that I was able to actually sit down and focus. Writing a book is hard. Publishing a book is even harder. So there were times when I had my doubts about whether or not this book would ever see the light of day.
And there goes a text to Mark or an email. Mark, take us through that journey in working with Moxie, how the concept started and then the steps, along the way.
I think she says something incredibly important. It's a labor of love. It's obvious that she loves her character and that she wanted to create something worthwhile. And she did research and she combined those two, that creative aspect along with the research aspect. And I think it's important for all writers, and especially people who have never written before, that you have to go into it with a high degree of passion, a high degree of, I want to get this done. I want to see what I can do. And in the end, produce something that you're proud of. And I think if you can do that, you can find an outlet for your work. But you can see it's obvious with Moxie there that she has that passion. She has that drive, and she wanted to create something worthwhile that encompassed all her beliefs and her creativity. And that's what makes a good book. But if it doesn't sell, it doesn't sell. But the author at the end of the day should feel proud of what they produced and be willing to take that chance to put it out in the world and see if criticism, praise, whatever it comes of it. But in the end, they're proud of what they created. And you can tell Moxie is, and that's incredibly important.
When I think of the time period, it fits the book. And I try to think, yeah.
It's great. And she's right. It's an understudied aspect of American history, that moment in time. And those people who lived through it, they understood, like, the country seemed to be teetering on the brink of anarchy, where you had one generation taking over for another, different values, different beliefs. And it's difficult for us to go back and look at it through history. And I think that's why historical fiction is an important aspect to it, because you have this character that you're attached to. She's going through her own personal journey, but in the background, you have this historical event. And again, I think it's underutilized or understudied in our culture that time.
I agree. There was so much going on, the free love movement, the drug situation, the war, politics, style, if you want to go there.
And music.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I was going to just hit that up right here. For anybody that rolls a little more spiritually, and that's not about religion, that's just spiritual. We're in the age of Aquarius right now, if you talk to those in the know. And there was a song called Aquarius, which came out in 1969 by a group called The Fifth Dimension. And they say that we are bridging into what's called the fifth dimension. So that came from 1969, right? That, the same period and all that time. And I try to take your story with her, and I try to, in my mind, all right, let's put her in 1983. It doesn't really fit. Let's throw her into the 90s. I don't see that happening. Could you place her in today's world? I don't know, maybe.
I don't know, but you know what? You're absolutely right. And one of the reasons why I picked that time frame is I wanted to share with the younger generations of today, the Gen Zs, some sense of the events and the circumstances that shaped their grandparents. Because, things weren't all that great for them either. And they muddled through. They learned how to survive. They were resilient. The country survived. But it shaped them into the kind of people that they are today, with the kind of values, with the kind of belief systems, ideologies that they have. And I think that's important for young people to know, because intergenerational understanding is a beautiful thing, I think.
What's next for you, Moxie? Now that you've got this book, is this your only book?
It's my first book, first in a trilogy. So I'm working on the second book right now. The second book is about the same character and a handful of the characters that appear in the first book, but at a different period of their life. So you mentioned 1983. Picture Cozy, 15 years later. She's now 20-something going on 30. She's a different kind of person. But at her core, she hasn't changed. She's held on to those same values and belief system, but now she has to deal with a completely different world and different circumstances. So I thought that would be interesting to follow one character through these different periods of time and see how they evolve.
What a cool concept. Like, seriously. And when you think of, 1983, what was going on, AIDS crisis was just beginning. You had the Challenger disaster as well. A lot of things going on there. It's funny you mentioned the core. I have a friend who wrote a song. Yeah, it's just a folk song in my area a bunch of years ago, but I never forgot this lyric. The core is still the same, but there's a few more cracks there in my shell. And I kind of think that applies to all of us. We're all, we're inside, we're the same. But as life goes on, stuff happens. We're beautifully broken. Things happen. And, it looks like Cozy, that's going to happen to Cozy and a journey.
Yeah,
wow.
Absolutely.
Final question.
Sure.
Virgin Snow.
Yep.
What's the significance of that title?
Well, first of all, I wanted a title of the book that would resonate with Buffalonians. And I think Virgin Snow is something all people in Buffalo understand, that virgin snow, when snow first falls, it's a beautiful thing. It's pure, it's gorgeous, it makes everything look beautiful. And also, it's a metaphor for Cozy herself, because throughout at least the first part of the book, she is quite pure, quite innocent, quite beautiful in that innocence and purity. And so it seemed an appropriate title for the first book.
Any working titles for the second book, or we're not giving that up yet?
Not giving that up yet.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Mark has to approve it after all.
I love all of this. This is just so exciting, having a concept for a book and seeing the baby get birthed, if you will.
Thank you.
And now the baby's growing up, into a trilogy. Mark, somebody wants to maybe do this. It's resonating with them. Easiest way is your website. What's that?
NFBpublishing.com. There's a simple form to fill out on the submissions page, and that gets the process started.
Love it. Both of you, thanks for being here today, Moxie and Mark. And thanks for I got to say, a very intriguing story. And even just speaking today, I'm hooked. I see the images of the 60s and 70s. And I got to dig into this book. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Steve.
Thank you. And we'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the mytuner-radio, online radio box, and simpleradio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.